Okay, so just firstly, I'll just say welcome to everybody. This is part of Camden's Black History season, and it's Back to the Future. And this interview is a part of a series called Contemporary Activism, Past to Present, which is a series of online discussions with leaders of change, exploring the different approaches to activism, what change has happened, and how others can get to be involved. My name's Kwame, and I'm here on behalf of the Black Curriculum. I'm an educator and facilitator. The Black Curriculum is a social enterprise that was founded last year in October during Black History Month by Lavinia Stennett. Our aim is to get Black British history incorporated into the national curriculum. But beyond that, what we aim to do is empower youth nationwide with a all-round understanding of our shared British identity and history, focusing largely on the contributions of Black Britons over the years. And I'm joined here, it's my pleasure to introduce Sir Geoff Palmer. Sir Geoff Palmer is a human rights activist, discoverer of the Bali abrasion process, and Scotland's first Black professor, amongst many other things. Welcome, Sir Geoffrey Palmer, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, good morning, Kwame. Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's a pleasure, my pleasure. How have you been? Are you well?
Yes, I'm well. I'm sort of here in the far north of Britain, so I'm in Scotland.
In sunny Scotland.
Near Edinburgh. It's near the city, our capital city, Edinburgh.
Yeah. It's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us today. So I guess we can start and go ahead with the interviews and the questions. So the first question is, this year Camden is celebrating Black history, not just throughout October, from October to December. And we'd like to hear a little bit from you about why you believe that celebrating Black history for more than just 1 month is so important.
I think, again, now that, Camden is saying that we would like to go on to, 3 months, I think it depends on what you think you can manage, whether you can sustain 3 months of this history. And I think that, you must have done planning into 1 month, and I think you should go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it is very important. And as you said, it does take a lot of planning and it does take a lot of research as well. But the resources are there, the individuals such as yourselves are there as well. And I think it's important that we begin to uncover these and celebrate them, not just for 1 month, but ultimately with the goal of achieving it all year round as well. And this is hopefully the first step into progressing towards that. So Geoff, yes. I was just wondering your experiences of activism and stuff like that. Could you tell us a little bit about what contemporary activism means to you, and what has also been your biggest achievement as an activist, as a scientist?
Well, activism is very important in the sense that, if we used to call it social activism. Mm-hmm. And what we meant by that was that in a situation where you have people whose history is not in the mainstream, whose social conditions are not in the mainstream, then we need people to actually take up that responsibility. And for example, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a sociologist, but when I was brought up in London, I arrived at Liverpool in 1955. Mm-hmm. I could, just about read and write well. Mm-hmm. And then I went through the school system because of 1 month, meaning that I was 14 years and 11 months. I had to go back to school in London. And I just, I was regarded as educationally subnormal. Mm-hmm. And my mom had to keep me at school until I was 15. Now, and that was 1955. Now, mm-hmm. I had nobody around then to either say whether, it was right or wrong to designate me educationally subnormal. I just took it and went to another school. And I eventually got out of London, got myself a degree. And when I came back to work, after I got a PhD, I came back to work in a research institute in Surrey. And I remember my wife coming home one day, and she was a psychologist. And she showed me a bit of paper, in 1969. 69, my wife, a psychologist, showed me a piece of paper. And on that paper, it said, white kids and Indian kids are at the top academically. And, then Africans and then Afro-Caribbeans are at the bottom. And I looked at it and I said, is this from your work? And she said, yeah. She was a psychologist in that area. And this is south of London. And she just said to me, what are you going to do about it? And I said, I'm a scientist. I work on barley. I don't know anything about education and stuff like this. She says, well, you're the only one who's going to do it, so you better do it. And I wrote to the Times Educational Supplement, and I made my case that, what they were saying on that piece of paper wasn't right. I came and I was, not well educated in Jamaica, but I came and I made a good job of it. I don't think it's right. And the Times Educational Supplement say, write us an article. And I wrote my first article on the education of Black kids and what's holding them back with no experience. And that was published in 1969 in the Times Educational Supplement. And in that, I said, I explained about Jamaica culture, how the parents, have children who are supposed to be seen and not heard. So they're extremely well behaved. The children aren't going to challenge you at school because this is how they were brought up. And therefore, you cannot make judgments about their potential without knowing anything about their history or themselves. And one of the phrases that I had to deal with then, and I wrote 3 articles for the Times Educational Supplement between 1969 and I think 1972, 69, 72. And one of the phrases that was used then, and I think that is still in the consciousness today, is the teachers were saying, Black parents have got unrealistic expectations for their children. Unrealistic expectations. And what they're really saying is what we're saying to some people are saying today, that's what killed George Floyd. Unrealistic expectations. We've been designated because of our history to be, and we're fighting that battle in Edinburgh just last month, where David Hume, the philosopher, in 1753 said, in his view, Black people, Negroes are inferior to white people. And that went through slavery, and it went through post-slavery colonialism, and we still have it in the subconsciousness of some people today. But that was it, unrealistic expectations, because we've been designated as not being of one human race as we are. So activism is about changing those perceptions, those prejudices, which makes up our racism today. And that's how I started writing articles, because nobody's going to write it for us. We have to do it ourselves. That's what the poet, Black poet Langston Hughes, a long time said. If somebody isn't going to do something for you, then maybe we've got to do it ourselves. That's the activism that I know of. And we can use it to motivate our kids. But then the education system, the mainstream, has got to do the standard teaching so that the kids can pass exams. But we somehow, in certain circumstances, have to give them a sense of belonging And without a sense of belonging, you fail. So that's how I see activism, and that's what I've used.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very insightful. And I agree so much with all of it. And you did mention before that, you know, you didn't have a background in sociology or psychology or these things, but nonetheless, you went on to write about education and the contributions of education, but also how it affects the development of young Black individuals in the United Kingdom. And I can only imagine that would have been a real struggle for yourself in that educational environment, but being told that you're intellectually subnormal and whatnot. To go on from that, in terms of from that experience, and despite you articles, you took a path into science. You said, you know, you did your PhD in Bali and stuff like this. In terms of the contributions that you yourself have made outside of maybe the social sciences and humanities, what would you regard as your biggest achievement, or is there anything that you would like to say to the importance of how the direction that you've chosen as opposed to the social sciences and whatnot?
Well, as I said, when I came to London, and I managed to get into university because I worked at Queen Elizabeth's College as a junior lab technician. And I was just putting on Twitter yesterday how, you know, I had to get off the tube at Notting Hill Gate, the tube station, and that was 1958. And I was terrified because there were the riots, and I had to walk very quickly looking behind me. You know, you had to do that nearly all the time, or you got to be able to run, you know, so you either fought, walked quickly, or ran. And I worked at this lab as a junior lab technician in 1958. And the professor there, somehow realizing, you know, I was fighting battles for my mom with the landlord. The landlord wanted to chuck us out, so he turned the water off. So we're in the middle of London with no water in 1958. You know, I had to get a bucket to go across the road. So it was tough. And the professor knew I was doing all those struggles. And he stopped me one day and he said, I don't think, you know, you're making out that you're not very wise, but I don't think so. I'm going to give you half a day off. And I want you to get your A levels and O levels and go to university by 1961. This was 58. And I did, and I got my A levels and I got the O levels, but no university would take me in 1961 because they're used to taking overseas students, not immigrants. Because they look on the application, they could see you come from 46 Bride Street off Liverpool Road in London. So, you know, you're not from Jamaica or Nigeria. So I was rejected. And the professor was somehow he reacted to that. And he then told me to wait one afternoon. And he rang up Leicester University. And that's how I got into Leicester University. Wow. So again, you know, I didn't fill up an application form. The professor rang up and got me in, even though I was perfectly qualified to get in. So that was the beginning of my science journey, in that I did an honors degree in botany. And I did botany again because my maths wasn't that good. And I did biology at school. And my chemistry wasn't bad. So one thing is important, and that applies to me, it may not apply to kids, but be very much aware of where your potential is. Be very much aware of choosing things, and this is what I want. You know, I said to some of my kids, go into dentistry or go into accountancy or something, because I knew that's a profession. And therefore, you should be able to get a job in your profession, medicine or the law or something. But if you just want to do physics or maths or chemistry as pure subjects, or history or English, it is much harder for us because of prejudices. So I chose botany. I don't know why. I figured I could get into agriculture. Something to do with agriculture, I felt. But botany, I could manage it academically. So those are the reasons I would thinking. I developed a concept in one of my recent books where I call it system consciousness. And what I mean by that is to be aware of the expectations. You don't have to follow them, but it's to be aware of them within our system. And that's what I learned to do on my own. I developed that concept. So I'm doing botany at Leicester. 1961 I went. I left in 1964 with an honours degree in botany. And I went back to North London. So what do you do with an honours degree in botany in Finsbury Park? What do you do with an honours degree in Islington, near the women's prison or Pentonville prison, where I live next to? I could see the wall of Pentonville prison from my window. What do you do with a botany degree? So I went for a job interview at the Labour Exchange at Seven Sisters Road. And the guy looked at me and said, "What can you do?" And I said, "I've got an honours degree in botany. I've got an honours degree." And he turned to his friend and he said, "I think this guy's got a temperature." This is 1964. A degree is a temperature. Mm-hmm. So he gave me 2 jobs, one to peel potatoes and one in a betting shop. I had 2 choices. So I took the one to peel the potatoes. And I peeled potatoes from June till December 1964. And then I saw an advert for agriculture to do a master's at Nottingham University. So I applied and I had this famous interview, which you can read on Life Scientific, where I was asked by a famous politician, why didn't I go home and grow bananas with my degree? And I said to him, it's difficult to grow bananas in Haringey. And that's a very pointed statement for all our kids and all our people, because what I was saying to this politician in 1964, if I've got to grow bananas, it's got to be in Britain. Because this is where we belong. This is where I belong. I'm going nowhere. My history puts me here. Mm-hmm. My history puts me here. I've got a right to be here. Okay, I didn't get the position, but I did make my point. And I went back and peeled potatoes, but in Christmas, 1964, there was an advert from Edinburgh for a PhD. And I came for the interview, and I was interviewed by a wonderful old white lady, and she took me. And she took me on the basis that she checked my background. She looked at, I came on a banana boat from Jamaica, from New York in 1955 at Liverpool. I met my mum. 1 month, I had to go to school for that 1 month. I struggled in London during the late 50s. Eventually got to university. So she took all that into consideration. The point is that a lot of other people wouldn't. Mm-hmm. Because it's not just about the qualification with people. It's what we used to call wider access. That you look at somebody and you look at the degree of difficulties they've had. And she did that. And I did a PhD with her from 1964. I got my PhD in 67. That means from 65 January to 67, I got my PhD. So things speeded up. Once I knew where I was, what I was doing, I got my PhD in 67 and I did a postdoc from 67 to 68. And then the thing was about jobs. But during my PhD, I developed scientific concepts, which were novel in fact. For example, during my PhD, what I discovered was the whole world for 200 years thought when the grain is growing, all the enzymes that digest the grain to change it into sugar so you can make malt bread with it. Malt bread is sweet and tasty. So if we're going from barley to malt bread, the grain digests itself. Mm-hmm. And you use the same grain for making beer and whiskey, malted grain. And what my work showed then, which nobody believed worldwide, you're talking about big brewers like Carlsberg and Heineken with big research establishment, Budweiser, Coors, all over the world. Everybody believed that the germ digested the grain. What I said with my work, the germ didn't do that. It's the bran we eat. I said that is the tissue in the grain that produces enzymes that digested the grain. And therefore, when I went to do my research work, I got my first job. It was in Surrey at the Brewing Research Institution, which is a big research setup. No, you don't even talk about Black people then because you didn't even see Black people on the streets down in Red Hill. I worked there between 1968 and 77. 68 and 77. And I took those scientific concepts from my PhD and I thought, can I make a difference in industry that uses the grain? Because that's science. Can I use it to make a difference in industry? And that's what we did. What we did was, if the brand did it, let's stimulate the brand. We don't need the germ. And that's what we did. We stimulated the brand. And that took 2 days off the processing time in industry, 2 days. 2 days every 9 days is a lot of money. Mm-hmm. You can make more stuff within that time. And by 1972, some of the biggest brewers in Britain were using the process. Mm-hmm. Bass Charrington's. We had to develop a machine to treat the grain. So we developed a machine. So I started with 1 grain and 1 pin. And we ended up with a machine that does 10 tons an hour. From 1 grain to 10 tons an hour. Each machine. And Bass Charrington's had 8 machines doing 10 tons an hour each. So that research transformed the industry in terms of its scientific thinking, but also in terms of the industry. Now, what was the reaction? The reaction was my old boss at the Research Institute threatened to fire me when I was doing that work. While I was doing that development work, he said to me, "Why are you doing that? That won't work. I gave you routine work to do." So I did the routine work during the week and I went at weekends and continued with this work. So you sometimes have to outsmart the system, not fight it. Mm-hmm. You can fight it in other ways. And the ironies of it, when I published the second paper, scientific paper, he put his name on it as well. Again, that's the way life is. But it wasn't easy. My boss didn't want it. And the concept is still of such that in 2017, there are Australian scientists still trying to prove me wrong. Believe you me. And till 2017. And they're wrong because they can't prove me wrong. It's not that I'm omnipotent or anything. That I studied that, I worked out the concepts. And the concepts work. So although this process was working in industry, producing millions of tons of grain for the benefit of the industry, I didn't get any great benefit. I was made a senior scientist from a scientist. But you still have people still trying to challenge the concept. But that didn't bother me. I left the Research Institute in 1977, came back to the university where I did my PhD, Heriot-Watt University. My old supervisor had retired, so they took me in. I had an interview and competed, got the job. And I stayed there from 1977 until 2005 when I retired. And during that period, I did a lot more research. I was the first person to take a scanning electron micrograph of a cereal grain inside. Nobody's ever seen the inside of a cereal grain when you consider how old cereals are. But I took a picture and showed the world that the grain, where the starch is and the protein is, for the first time in 1972. So what we have now, I'm quite comfortable. I've got my job as a lecturer. I'm at the university. One of the most significant things happened to me at university is I had my first African student who came to me in the late 70s. And he was from Nigeria. And he wanted to work on sorghum, the African grain. Now, I'd never seen sorghum. I'm from Jamaica. So, and he brought the grain in a bag. And he said, I want to work on this. And I said, fine. You know, we worked on sorghum. We looked at its structure. We looked how it worked. We compared it to European grain. The reason why I'm telling you that is because this work was then critical later on for one of the biggest companies in the world. That he did his PhD and he went back to Nigeria and he started teaching. And then I had one or two of the Nigerian students wanting to work on sorghum because we published on sorghum. So African students wanted to come and work in Edinburgh with me on sorghum. I've got one still in Edinburgh. He's still here, he won't leave. Every week he rings me and says, Prof, are you okay? The point is that, what was the outcome of that? In 1985, so this is 1970s, 1985's late 80s, I had a phone call from one of the biggest companies in the world, that's Guinness. And Guinness, is very big with Diageo. So Guinness is not a small company. They're worldwide and they have all sorts of business ramifications. So I had a phone call in 1980, late 80s, and it says, I wasn't even professor then. It may have been, I'm not sure. Anyway, the call came and it said, could I come to London? The company wants to speak to me. And I went to London, and the production director said, we have a problem in Nigeria, Geoff, could you go there for us? And I said, to do what? And he said, the Nigerian government has banned the import of European grain. And could you go and look at it and see what we could do? Guinness has 4 breweries there. Heineken has 5. And they're dependent, these are big companies there. Bigger than London or even Dublin. The Nigerian company then was 4 big breweries. So I joked and I said, well, I'm originally from Nigeria, I think. I didn't know then, I know now. I'm 80% Nigerian genetically. Wow. Genetically, I'm 80%. Yeah. So 5% Cameroon, 5%. So I'm Jamaican. That's what a Jamaican is. So anyway, I said to him jokingly, I said, John, I left Nigeria under difficult circumstances a while ago. And so I was sort of just saying, this is my history. This is where I came from. And I don't know how I'm going to manage it when I get there, because I'd never been to Nigeria. And he just said, Geoff, we're sure you can handle that. So anyway, got on the plane, went to Nigeria. And to cut a long story short, I looked at sorghum. I went to Maiduguri. This is the north of Nigeria, right to the Sahara Desert. Mm-hmm. Now, this is a Jamaican from Haringey, North London. I'm in Nigeria, looking at a problem for one of the biggest companies in the world. And I came to the conclusion with some research and discussion you can make Guinness beer, or Heineken can make their lager from sorghum, from African grain. It can be done. And that's exactly what they did. So we use the African grain, and I use the science which I had learned and which I use with my students. And we publish papers on sorghum. We transformed it from what they call feed grain to now a first-class cereal. In fact, Nigeria is now the 4th biggest producer of sorghum, I'm told. But when I went, it was nowhere. Mm-hmm. And what that concept is that, and I've been told this by the professor from University of Pretoria just recently in South Africa. What he said to me, he says, Geoff, the concept of big companies using the local grain has transformed the agriculture, because small local farmers can sell, have now got a market which is consistent and large, and thus they have enough for food. Before, they were just doing it for themselves, food and feed, not making any money for themselves. They now have a market. And apparently this professor from Pretoria said it came from that work we did in the 80s, late 80s. So again, it's a lovely story of, and I remember one of the things I remember from that work was the last time I went to Nigeria, and the brewers, the black brewers, took me to the airport. And what they said to me, you gave us LRM. And I didn't figure out what LRM until I got on the plane. It's local raw material. We transformed local raw material from being nothing in terms of importance to something which is now of critical importance, and it's local. It's a sense of belonging. Same thing I was talking about at the beginning, where when people have a sense of belonging, and what the racist does, the racist attacks your sense of belonging. So the whole point is that the scientific work, which I did, which I chose to do botany, paid off in the end. So don't be afraid of the subjects you choose if you're a young person. You don't have to be everybody can't be doctors or want to be doctors or lawyers or accountants. Choose something that you think you can manage and get a good degree in. And the better degree you get, the better it is. And then try and use and develop that. And don't try and rush. You know, I was at a secondary modern school at 15, you know, where there was no opportunities. So take, you know, your time and rely on your parents and what we call the social activism, people around you who can guide you and advise you. And in the end, if it works, it worked for me. So there's no reason why it should work for you. And I wasn't bright.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. And I can imagine the connotations that has had since then, as you said, on industry, but you know, globally now, the global contributions that has created. I mean, if we think of beer and all these kind of things, and again, the same in Africa as well with the production of sorghum and reimagining what that is. They're incredible achievements. And this all comes from your background in botany and then your PhD in research and stuff. And at the moment, we know that kind of in countries, evidence kind of says to us that in countries that lacks diversity and diverse representation within the education system, roles and careers in STEM research tend to be lower. What do you think the impact of this is, and how do you think that this needs to be addressed within the educational systems and at large?
Well, it's interesting because some years ago, I had an invitation to go to Bristol.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, as I say, I'm from North London, and you don't travel much out to there in the old days. And I used to go to London to see my mum, you know, no, sadly passed away. But, and I took the Bristol thing because I could go see my mum and then go to Bristol. And it was the Bristol Council, I think. It was the Bristol, there were people there, I don't know the exact organization, but they invited me to come to speak to Bristol teachers in STEM. It was a STEM initiative. And so I used to go once a year, a few years ago. And I spoke to them about, you know, my journey in terms of my scientific journey, but also to point out that, you know, many Black or BME children, some of the schools they go to don't really promote science. Mine, the secondary model school I went to didn't. And nobody encouraged me when I went to the grammar school for 3 years. I just liked botany. But as I said, I didn't have the background for maths. And I struggled with chemistry and physics. But all these things I used to go and teach these teachers. And I just noticed there was an article recently about STEM in Bristol. And I think they must have developed what we were doing then, because they were talking about encouraging BME children, more of them to take science subjects, but which is rather a clever approach, which the university was using, where if they didn't have a lot of Black staff, they used to get Black postgraduate students to help, because there were probably more Black postgraduate students even from abroad, you know, not necessarily for local. So they were using all the resource around them. So students, teachers, and activists within the community to help to give these BME children a greater awareness of science, rather than just the law or, you know, accountancy or whatever. And I think we need, because we've had significant Black scientists around the world, and I don't want to get to a situation where you have to tell a Black kid, well, he's a Black scientist, so you should become a scientist. I think we should have children who said, that's what I want, but they could say, look at my work or somebody else and get some motivation from that. But it shouldn't be the only thing. Mm-hmm. Or else, you know, I don't think that will produce the best thing, because they may say, he did botany, I don't want to do that, and switch off. What they have to believe is, as people, they are capable of doing anything, any subject which they have an interest in. Mm-hmm. And I think STEM should be introduced to these kids on that basis. We don't have to convince them with a Black scientist, mm-hmm. you know, male or female. We should say the society needs scientists. They whatever, you know, this is what scientists do. And we can use examples. Because one of the best scientists with an industrial drive and link was a chap called Carver, I think, in the United States. And he did work on peanuts. So the peanuts we eat today, we eat it because of a Black scientist called Carver from the United States. You know, people who wear, you know, what they call these hoods, you know, for safety, was originally a Black guy who actually suggested that, you know, if you're going to go into smoke, you can wear a mask or a hood, which will take out the smoke. So again, here we have, I think it was Morgan, I think, who actually introduced that. And he also did something to do with traffic lights. you know, the safety of traffic lights. So there are loads of examples of Black scientists about, but what I'm trying to say is that for STEM or anything in the community, we say to the kids, you have the same capacity as a white person to do anything you like, and we've got to get you to get those exams, whether they're O levels or your GC or GSE or the different various exams. We have highest up in Scotland. Once you get those, then you need those to get in. But you can decide what you're interested in, whether it's physics, chemistry, and STEM is, you know, science, technology, engineering, and maths, I think. That's and that covers all the scientific disciplines. And there's a great satisfaction of working with nature and to feel that you have actually found something out that what nature does. And once you find that out, you know, I've got a book on cereals and I got a strap line at the front. And my book is called, I think, Cereal Science and Technology. It's a good title because nobody else can use it. And that's the essence of a title, Cereal Science and Technology. And the strap line is, technology is science that works. Technology is science that works. So if you have the science, this is the motivation for doing science. Because if you're good at the science and you've got good eyes to see that nature isn't saying that, what nature is saying is that. Once you know that, you actually can improve technology or develop new technologies. So that's the importance of STEM. Mm-hmm. You as a scientist can make changes in the society for the good of all people. And there is no such thing as a black 4 or a black 5. A 5 is a 5.
It's true.
There's no race
to
science. And therefore, you know, you know what when I think of it, you know, we had over 12 million people in slavery and, you know, cutting sugar cane, harvesting cotton and coffee. And one of those persons could have produced people which could have understood COVID-19. Mm-hmm. We cannot afford to not use the brain or try to educate the brain of one human being, because it is that brain that may come up with the concept that we need to save us. And anybody who deprive a young person, black, white, pink, or blue, of education, then they are doing a disservice, probably to the future. We don't know. So that's why STEM is important. That's why education is important, because we need every brain to come up with that concept that might just save us. I know that sounds maybe, you know, like a fairy tale.
No, but it's true. It's true.
But
it's
to
true.
me, it is, because nobody could expect what I've done. You know, nobody could. If somebody had stopped me when I arrived in 1955, then nothing I've done would have been done. You know, it could be by somebody else by chance. Mm-hmm. But this is what I feel why it's important, that we've got to give everybody the best possible chance, and race shouldn't stop it. Because, you know, I've often said, we are one humanity, nothing less. Mm-hmm. And I'm fighting the historians and all the people who try to make out that we are different species or different races. We are no such thing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We are people. Different but the same.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. That was very, very, very fascinating and very insightful as well, especially when you were saying about the use of postgraduate students working with BME children and stuff. That's because it really reshapes the way that we view education and the role of educators and the role of researchers or students as well. And given that you mentioned before that you spent a lot of your time in Scotland now as well, and I know that in Edinburgh and Lothian, you have the Edinburgh and Lothian Regional Equality Council. I believe you're on the board for that. And
yes, I'm the old president.
Old president for that, and you've done a lot of work there. Do you feel that there's, see for someone like myself who's in London, do you feel that there is a big difference, a diverse difference in the work that takes place in places like London down further south, in major cities, as opposed to the work that takes place in Edinburgh? From your experience, have you seen a difference in that? Or
yeah, there is a difference. For example, when I used to go to visit my mom in Haringey, before she passed away, and I know Haringey well. And in Edinburgh, I've got a citizen advice bureau just in walking distance from where I'm sitting now. And I'm on the board of that. And when I went down to see my mom once, and I thought, is there a CAB near here? And she said, no, I don't think so. And then I said, do you have an equality organization? Like LREC, which you were just talking about. And she said, no, I've never heard of it. And so then I looked and I think, well, in Edinburgh, it's a big city. We have that equality organization. We've got other organizations. And nearly every ethnic group have got an organization. LREC covers a lot of them. And therefore, in Scotland, we have a lot of that community-related organization within our social structure. I'm helping a new formation with a young man called Silence, and he's looking after a justice. He set up a justice group organization, of which I'm chairing. And he's looking at himself. He's not a historian, but he's looking at the history of his area, where he comes from, in the Lothians, and he's looking at trying to represent people within the justice area. So again, that is something new. So in Scotland, we have, a lot of organizations, but I know one in England called the Reach Society, and they look after the education of Black children, especially from the Caribbean. And again, it is well organized. It has a chair and highly structured. And therefore, what I say to governments, and I say to big companies who ring me, whether they're big banks, finance companies, they're all coming to a little migrant from London, from Jamaica. And one of the things I tell them all, and I will say it now, if you are serious about equality, if you are serious about diversity, what is the organized structure do you have at present dealing with it? What is the organized structure? It shouldn't be voluntary. If the authorities believe that this is important, they must treat it as important. There must be policies and there must be objectives or outcomes that you have put down, that this is part of your objective to try and become more inclusive, to add more diversity to the way you run your society. Because a diverse society requires diverse management, or it will not be efficient. You cannot attend to a diverse needs in a non-diverse way. And somehow some people are surprised when I say that. But this is my experience. That, and this is the only index of seriousness to me, that this is what we have to do in order to ensure that our representation, and representation is critical, because this morning, I just had to laugh when I give you just a couple of stories about the importance of representation. That, and I tell the story, this one story last, but in Edinburgh last year, I went to give a lecture at in the festival, and I arrived at the venue, very grand, you know, and I said to the attendant who was there, I said, "Oh, by the way, I've come to give a lecture." And she said, "Oh, right, a lecture. When? What time?" And I said, "I think it's 2:00. And she looked at the program, and then she looked back at me and said, "No, you can't be giving a lecture at 2:00, she chuckled, because that lecture has been given by Professor Sir Geoff Palmer." Here we have somebody who couldn't see that I could be that person. And she wasn't a bad person. It's just her system consciousness in terms of my relationship to that. She still sees me as a bus driver or something else, because that's what Black people do. And the other instance was, you know, and there's nothing wrong with bus drivers. I'm just saying, in the consciousness, she's back in the 60s, because that's what she knows Black men do, or, you know, I don't know what else she knew, but it is that concept which we have to try and change. The other one was, I went to an institution and wanted to get entrance to go and do whatever I was doing. And the young man at the door said, "Oh, you can't go in there." And he said, "Do you know anybody in there?" And I said, "Yeah, I used to know the boss." And he said, "You knew the old boss?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Were you his chauffeur?" So this is where we still are. Mm-hmm. You know, nothing wrong with chauffeurs. Mm-hmm. But the point is that it is this stereotyping, again, based on prejudgment. And prejudgment leads to discrimination. Mm-hmm. That's what it does. Mm-hmm. And just this morning, you know, getting ready to speak to you, I went to the doctor's to take a blood sample or something. And I have to phone in, you know, to say you're there, because the doors are closed. So I phoned in and I said, "This is Palmer." And the attendant said, "Fine, yeah, just come to the back door and press the button." So I did just that. And so I, you know, phoned, went, pressed the button, and I looked through the glass and she could see me. And I heard her shouting, saying, "You can't just turn up for an appointment anymore. You've got to make an appointment." Wow. And I said, "You've just spoken to me." "Oh, sorry." The point is that the way I spoke didn't sound foreign enough for her to put that relationship. What are we going to do with our grandchildren and children who speak just like the locals? Mm-hmm. You know, are we, you know, what she's got to be taught is that she should ask who I am.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's eerily similar to I don't know if you've seen recently on the news and stuff what has been happening with she's
the barrister.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. I know that she's doing a lot of pioneering work around this now, but it was when I looked into it, it was such a shame as to what had actually taken place on that day, you know, multiple mm-hmm. times. And she's doing a lot of work on it now, and there's a lot of younger individuals that are also doing work around representation. I mean, as mm-hmm. the Black curriculum around education. If there was one piece of advice, or a bit of advice that you could give to younger individuals that are looking to get into this work, or that are looking to resist these negative representations and what's taking place in society today, if there was one piece of advice that you could give to the younger generations or the generations such as ourselves, what would that be?
I think this is going to continue to happen because we, from my time with Enoch Powell in the 60s, where where the politician actually said in Smithwick, if you want an N-word for a neighbor, vote Labour. Mm-hmm. And he won the seat. Mm-hmm. The point is, what we have to do is to continue to work, continue to achieve, because there will come a time when, we don't know when it is, when, we will not be judged by these misconceptions of history. Mm-hmm. We will not be, that will go. And I think it's sad that it's taken, as I call it, the crucifixion of George Floyd, because it's the law killing somebody. Mm-hmm. That's what that is. It has taken that for me to be talking to you today. It would not have happened by any government policy, mm-hmm. by any activism. It is, and we can't allow to let this go. And I think what we've got to do, what I've done, is what's happened at the door this morning, or what happened last year, or what happened with the interview, many years ago, or what happened when my landlord was chucking us out and we had no drinking water, and he closed the kitchen and the bathroom. All these things, I just think that tomorrow is what I'm living for. I can't really let today stop me. Mm-hmm. And somehow we have to see ourselves as special, in a sense that, everybody knows that I don't want statues down. My attitude is I want, and this is some form of, I regard this as an achievement, in a sense that because I said I don't want statues on, I want plaques on them saying what these people did. Okay, these statues are very important in our society, and some people say we should remove them, especially those statues linked to slavery. My view is that we shouldn't topple these statues, because they're an important part of not only white people's history, but an important part of ours. Mm-hmm. And the phrase I use is that if you remove the evidence, you remove the deed. Mm-hmm. And in 100 years' time, nobody will know who Coulson was and the evil that he did. The point is that what I want is that we put plaques on these statues. And the plaques must say exactly what they did, no matter how bad it is. And therefore, in Edinburgh, we have a very large statue in the middle of town. And it's a statue to a man called Henry Dundas. Now, one may say, oh, that's not important. Who was Henry Dundas? Then I would put to you, I would say, have you ever heard of William Wilberforce? And a lot of people, I'm sure, would say yes. Well, what I would then say, if you've heard of William Wilberforce and you've not heard of Henry Dundas, then you don't know the history of the abolition of the slave trade. Because Henry Dundas, as Home Secretary in 1792, stopped William Wilberforce from abolishing the slave trade, stopped him. He actually put down an amendment in Wilberforce's bill, and Dundas did it with one word. Wilberforce had put down that the slave trade should be abolished immediately. Dundas said it should be gradually abolished. One word, gradually. And that word went in the bill. And that one word stopped Wilberforce from 1792 to 1807, 15 years, during which time almost 630,000 Africans were transported into slavery. Henry Dundas also attacked Haiti, San Domingo, it was called then. Mm-hmm. And he attacked it in the 1790s. And he destroyed the economy of Haiti, who is still suffering. And why did he do that? He was protecting Jamaica as a slave colony, because Jamaica was the most significant sugar producing country of the British Empire. Over 50% of the sugar produced in the Caribbean came from Jamaica. Mm-hmm. Jamaica had 300,000 slaves out of 500,000 remaining. So Britain had about 800,000 slaves. So Dundas quite political in his action. If he destroys the French slave colony in San Domingo, Haiti, then Britain has the advantage, because then the economy of Britain will be better than that of France. Mm-hmm. Now, he did that as well. You know, and therefore, what else did he do, Henry Dundas? So he's the Wilberforce. He attacked Haiti. He then sent one of the most powerful governors Jamaica has ever had, called Balcarres, Earl Balcarres. Those who are from Jamaica and from Manchester, there is a little area there refers to Balcarres. Now, he went to Jamaica in the 1790s as well. Dundas sent him. And he attacked the Maroons. So they had a fight, a war, a Maroon War, with Balcarres, the British troops. And Balcarres made a deal with Balcarres, and he reneged on that deal. And I don't know whether a lot of black people's ever heard of him. Mm. He has a big 150 feet statue in the middle of Edinburgh. And what my view is that we've got to put that on his plaque. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's resistance. So we had a 3-year committee. Committee met for 3 years. And that you got the me on a historian helping him. And we spent 6 months, and the council disbanded the committee. Mm-hmm. They didn't want slavery on the plaque. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't give in. Connection. Okay, I'll pick it up. Where was I? Yeah, the committee was disbanded. And sadly, but to, helping me, George Floyd's death actually triggered President Viscount and the historian. So the council reconstituted the committee, and within 5 days, without the other two on it, the council left them off the committee. And within 5 days, we If you look on your Google, you'll see it. You now, this time in 199 slip is on the plaque, the proposed plaque. And it says that transported with the word over 500,000 Africans into slavery. It's on that plaque, and that plaque is now there in commemoration of the people who he transported. And therefore, this is activism. And therefore, it's about not being knowledgeable enough to stop people like that historian, and to stop the Viscount. And the Viscount in the newspaper, historian, he put in the newspaper that me. He put, not historian. He might as well call me because I was black. The point is that that's the sort of battles you have to fight.
Yeah. And
the only weapon you need is knowledge. Because I am very knowledgeable about this man, Henry Dundas. You know, he chose the Duke of Wellington's brother to go and kill the Sultan of Mysore in India.
Wow.
You know, and the fact is that the Heritage Society Trust, or whatever they call themselves, the English Heritage, got that wrong. In fact, they're blaming Clive of India for that act, awful act. It was Dundas. Dundas was president of the Board of Control. That means he controlled the colonies. He was Secretary of State for War. That's why he could attack Haiti. And that's why he could attack the Maroons. No, we've got to know that to fight. If we have, the battle needs it, that we had to know that. And this is nothing to do with barley. You know, this is not about, but give the council its due and the people of Edinburgh its due. The battle wasn't even done when we did that, because the Viscount and his pals made a submission to the council saying, you know, my view is fake news. But, you know, the facts are there. And the council put out a planning permission. So the council is seeking planning permission to put a plaque, which was already there.
Wow.
And there was a vote. Fortunately, we fought and we won it. And this was a general public vote. So this is the kind of fighting, if we're talking about activism, that to fight to get slavery and some recognition of our history and the people who died in it. That's how we had to fight. The point is as well, you know, other people say, well, why are you doing that? It's the past. As I said, we can't change the past, but we can change the consequences. And another thing we did was I was on the advisory board of Glasgow University. And I think it's the end of 2018. They asked for advice. And what Glasgow University did was to look at their history. And they found Glasgow University, which started in the 1400s, before Columbus went to the New World. Glasgow University looked at their history, found that they received about 200 million from slavery in legacies. And they've been to the West Indies, set up links with the University of the West Indies, putting out scholarships for black kids. So if there's a black kid out there want to go to Glasgow, there is a scholarship. And it was a great privilege for me because the university asked me to unveil the plaque in the church, in the university campus. And the plaque reads, you know, it's there commemorating the suffering of black people from whom this university benefited. And therefore, that's activism.
Yeah.
It's a sense of, they're fighting in different quarters and different areas. But we've now got one plaque up in the university, one in the middle of Edinburgh, which we hope will go up permanently soon. It's already there in the park, temporarily. Temporarily, it is up. The point is that I hope it will be there for the next 200 years.
Yeah.
So that people don't have to go to a university or a school to see that. But you're right, with the curriculum, that is critical. Because a lot of Scottish people, and even people when I go down to Liverpool or whatever to speak to people, or London, the general consensus of these people, these are Scottish people, white people or black people. Nobody's ever taught us that history before.
Mm-hmm.
Our schools should be telling you what I'm telling you this morning.
Mm-hmm.
The schools should be doing that. The fact is that everything I've just said about Henry Dundas, every person, black and white, should know.
Yeah.
So that they can challenge these historians who are still saying, can you believe it? There was an article in the Times not long ago where this historian is saying Dundas was an abolitionist. He was a gradual abolitionist.
Yeah.
And therefore, we have to challenge that, even though everybody knows that's what he did. But there are still historians and people like that out there, because these are the people who limit what we do, because some of them advise the government.
Mm-hmm.
And you're pushing where you are, and they're saying, well, there's no point pushing because, we abolished slavery. We did this, we built roads and we built schools. There's a professor of Oxford who says that. This is victimhood, and the Prime Minister used the word the other day. Victimhood. The point is that Professor Bigger at Oxford is saying, well, we built roads and we built a school and we taught them English. So the slavery bit is balanced.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have to do anything. The point is we've got to challenge that. We've got to challenge it and say, and I put on Twitter this morning, that our slavery, it's the most profitable evil against humanity that this world has known. And somehow, I don't want revenge. I just want redress.
Mm-hmm.
I want those kids to have an opportunity like I had. And therefore, we're going nowhere. I've made a video for the Scottish government and it says, "We are Scotland." So I'm the face of Scottish inclusion and diversity. And I hope that in England, for the whole country, that this will become the norm. Mm-hmm. Because we are part of this, the country, and we're going nowhere.
Yeah, yeah. And we have been for a very long time as well.
Jamaica, there are other countries. Jamaica has been part of this setup since 1655. 1655. Mm-hmm. So, it is, and our ancestors worked for the country, just like everybody else. Mm-hmm. And thus we expect the same respect and benefits. And as I always made a joke, I said, the country doesn't know who's standing on it, so why are you making such a big deal? What the country wants are people who make it better. And we're all here to do that.
That's so, well, thank you very much. Thank you for the very educational and insightful discussions. I've learned a lot as well in these discussions, and I know Dundas Street. I used to live at the bottom of Dundas Street as well,
right.
The street and the statue. So that was very educational. Thank you. So
Okay.
thank you very much for joining us. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank the Camden as well for putting this all together. And I'd like to let everyone know that they can share the video and like it at Camden Council, and also ourselves at the Black Curriculum as well. The more people that watch it, the better.
Absolutely. What you guys are doing is wonderful. And I've just remembered that one of my students went to Camden and started the brewery, Camden Brewery.
Oh, really? There we
So
go.
when you go to the Camden Brewery, you just say they're going to give you a drink.
I'll take you up on that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again, Sir Geoff. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye, Kwame. Take care. God
Bye.
bless. Bye.